At 2:47 a.m., inside the hollowed-out concrete belly of a drainage culvert, 6 men pressed flat against damp gravel felt the earth shift before they heard it. It was not an earthquake generated by tectonic plates sliding deep within the mantle, but a rhythmic pulse transmitted through bedrock that bypassed the auditory nerve entirely and vibrated directly in the marrow of their skeletons. This tremor arrived 3 minutes before the first signal from the orbital platform above, a delay measured in milliseconds that meant the difference between a coordinated strike and a chaotic ambush. Team lead Marcus checked his watch again, while the darkness outside remained absolute, save for the occasional flicker of amber strobes pulsing along the outer perimeter wall 300 meters to the north. The cost of hesitation at this precise second was measured in human lives, specifically the 6 operators currently crouched in the mud waiting for permission to move forward. The stakes were not theoretical, because if the platform failed to align its targeting vectors now, the facility would detect the intrusion and initiate a shutdown sequence that would scrub the data and force the world into diplomatic chaos. He signaled the advance while the team held their breath, boots finding purchase on the wet stone surface, and they moved out into the open space where the night sky offered no shelter from the surveillance satellites that watched everything below. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. Why this matters begins with the nature of the facility buried beneath the soil of Isfahan Province, a site designed to enrich uranium through the separation of isotopes using high-speed centrifuges spinning at velocities exceeding 60,000 revolutions per minute. These machines consume massive amounts of electricity and produce fissile material at a rate that defies standard safety protocols because the containment vessels are often thinner than industrial steel allows elsewhere. If left unchecked, this complex could produce enough enriched uranium for 5 nuclear weapons within 6 months, which translates to thousands of potential casualties if detonated and millions more displaced by fallout. The single irreversible moment occurred at 2:47 when the orbital platform locked onto the coordinates. You could a decision that burned the bridge behind it because once the kinetic rod is released, there is no recall button and the physics cannot be stopped mid-descent. This event changes something permanently because it proves that modern warfare has evolved beyond artillery and missiles into a system where gravity itself becomes the ammunition delivered from a silent point of origin above the cloud layer. We must understand that the cost here is not just dollars spent on hardware or hours lost in production, but the fundamental trust between nations regarding the location of sensitive infrastructure and the willingness to destroy it without warning. The threat is present because if this facility continues operating unchindered, the proliferation threshold moves closer for every hour the centrifuges spin, increasing the probability of conflict exponentially rather than linearly. This is not archived history because the capability exists today and the trigger mechanism remains active on a satellite orbiting the Earth somewhere beyond the atmosphere where oxygen does not exist to slow the incoming mass down. The unfolding of this mission requires us to reconstruct the exact sequence of events, starting with the smallest physical detail closest to the point of failure and expanding outward to the strategic consequence of the strike. At 2:48 a.m., the youngest operator named Torres reached the fence line, which was reinforced with high-tensile steel wire designed to resist cutting torches and heavy machinery. His hands found the wire steady despite the adrenaline spike that usually causes trembling in men wearing body armor weighing 40 kilograms above in an orbital slot that no government publicly acknowledged. A tungsten rod, dense and finished, accelerated past terminal velocity by nothing but gravity and physics, adjusted its descent path by 0.3 degrees to compensate for wind shear at 8 kilometers altitude. The first target was the lowest centrifuge level, located 40 meters underground, which sits beneath layers of rock and concrete designed to absorb shock waves, but not kinetic mass moving at Mach 20. The second tremor rolled through the bedrock, vibrating the fence posts loose, while Torres counted to 3 exhales and moved through the gap created by the survey drone, identifying the loose tension bracket 72 hours earlier. All 6 operators passed through the inner perimeter road, which was 30 meters of open asphalt, lit from above by the facility's newly activated flood system that cast a red glare across every surface, like blood spilled on a floor. Somewhere to the east, engines growled, not maintenance vehicles, but the response column mobilizing at full speed toward the garrison block. Marcus identified the sound before he saw the lights, which belonged to quick reaction force trucks rolling hard from the garrison block toward the east gate, where headlights swept in arcs across the access road, separating the breach point from the extraction route. The column was moving fast, organized, already fanning into entry formation, suggesting someone inside that complex hit an alarm the moment the first alignment pulse registered on their instruments. The gap between the team and the east gate was shrinking, maybe 40 meters of road separating the garrison vehicles from the breach point, and the timer started ticking down regardless of whether they wanted it to or not. And Marcus switched to the push frequency 1-click move now, and the team split into a rehearsed pattern while 2 operators broke left toward the perimeter wall shadow and 2 more cut diagonally toward a collapsed maintenance shed that provided hard cover from incoming fire. If you look at the structural load points inside the processing annex, you will notice the reinforcement beams angled to support the weight of the building against seismic activity, but they were not designed to withstand the force of a falling star hitting the roof directly. Marcus and Torres continued straight north toward a secondary access door in the processing annex outer wall, which according to imagery was rarely guarded after midnight. Tonight was not a normal midnight because the air pressure had dropped noticeably, indicating the arrival of the orbital impact zone. Light flooded the inner road from 3 directions, simultaneously creating zones of high visibility that made hiding impossible, while the response column pushed deeper into the perimeter, searching for footprints in the dust. As the response element dismounted at speed, Marcus reached the annex door and tried the handle, which was locked, and Torres was already at the hinge side, running a bypass circuit that took 12 seconds to complete because the lock was rated for emergency closure procedures requiring manual override keys. 12 seconds, 11, and above the facility, 3 kilometers of atmosphere, then vacuum, separated the ground from the orbital platform, which completed its 3rd and final targeting lock, resolving the rod's descent path to a single point 41 meters below the centrifuge hall's visible footprint. The 3rd alignment pulse hit harder than the previous ones, causing a section of perimeter fencing to vibrate loose at the far corner, clanking against its post, signaling that the kinetic energy transfer was beginning even before impact. The garrison column froze for 2 seconds as the ground shook violently and Torres got the door open, allowing Marcus to say that the 2 left operators were already pulling back toward the breach point while the garrison formation passed them, pushing deeper into the perimeter to locate the intruders. The 2 in the maintenance shed held position while the platform's targeting queue advanced, declaring the first rod inbound with impact scheduled for 43 seconds from now, while the garrison's QRF was through the east gate 20 meters from the breach point and closing fast. The ground did not shake. It lifted upward as the first rod hit the centrifuge level at 2 hours, 53 minutes and 14 seconds with no explosion in any conventional sense, just kinetic mass, terminal velocity, and physics delivering 40 meters of energy transfer in 0.2 seconds. The centrifuge hall floor came up and the ceiling came down 3 seconds later, and the deepest level of the Isfahan complex ceased to exist as a functional structure because the energy was transferred vertically rather than dissipating horizontally like a bomb blast would. Every operator on the inner perimeter went flat, instinct not ordered, while the garrison column stopped moving, with truck engines idling for 4 seconds while the entire facility held its breath waiting for aftershocks or counterfire to arrive. Marcus used those 4 seconds to signal the push element to go, and he and Torres were already through the annex corridor, moving toward the secondary processing wing, which lay 40 meters of interior hallway away. Pipes overhead rattled and fluorescent lights flickered from the shock wave while the floor still vibrated when they reached the processing annex door behind them, marking the limit of the safety zone. At the breach point, the other 4 operators had peeled into 2 pairs while one pair held the fence gap, which was the only exit route available to them, and the second pair cut left, angling toward the collapsed maintenance wall, which had now shed enough concrete to create workable cover from machine gun fire. The garrison reacted quickly, splitting their response column, half pushing toward the centrifuge ruins and half sweeping toward the breach point as they identified the entry vector and began moving faster than before, assuming they had found the escape route. Rifles raised radio calls, cutting through the sirens, marked the escalation from reconnaissance to direct engagement as the breach team pulled behind a collapsed wall section composed of concrete blocks half a meter thick, heavy enough to stop rifle rounds but not sustained mortar fire. The defenders pushed to within rifle range, close enough to count equipment on their kit and hold, waiting for flanking elements to come around, while the stalemate lasted 20 seconds, 30 seconds, while time seemed to dilate for everyone involved in the firefight. Marcus reached the processing annex, where the confirmation beacon sensor packages, the size of a fist, needed to be placed on structural load points inside the building, providing proof of destruction data for the mission verification record. Torres covered the corridor while Marcus planted the first beacon on the foundation pillar, then the second on the main beam, and the third on the exterior wall, connecting to the administrative block, ensuring redundancy in case the primary sensor failed due to heat or impact damage. When you observe the trajectory of the tungsten rods, you will notice that they are not guided like a missile, which requires active propulsion systems, but instead fall freely, accelerating until atmospheric drag equals gravitational pull, reaching speeds where the front tip glows white-hot from friction heating alone. The second rod dropped at 2 hours, 56 minutes, and 8 seconds, impacting the uranium processing wing, which was the annex building directly adjacent to the one Marcus was inside, taking the impact at its foundation without warning. In the sky outside, every window went white for 2 full seconds before the shock wave hit the annex wall like a freight train at speed, knocking Marcus against the corridor wall and forcing him to find his footing again before placing the 4th beacon and signaling push complete to the rest of the team. They reversed the corridor at a run while outside the processing annex was gone, where a 4-story structure stood 12 seconds ago, and there was now a compressed footprint of rubble and rising dust marking the spot where physics had performed its function exactly as calculated. The shock wave rolled the closest QRF truck sideways onto 2 wheels, and it stayed there tilted with the driver's door hanging open, while the east road was sealed now by armored vehicles heavier than the initial trucks, rolling across the only extraction corridor, parked nose to tail across the access road, closing the gap between the perimeter wall and the outer fence completely. The breach point was now behind a wall of steel, while the garrison encircled the perimeter in a tightening pattern covering southeast and west vectors, leaving only the north drainage culvert as the original approach, which remained barely unblocked despite the heavy security presence. Marcus checked his watch, noting the platform had 1 rod remaining in the bunker designated as Command Bunker beneath the administrative block located 60 meters north of their current position, and the impact was inbound with 17 seconds remaining before contact. The 2 pairs at the breach point had identified the armored seal on the east road, knowing there was no gap in that formation because the vehicles were interlocked with engines running and defenders positioned on all sides, ready to engage anyone attempting to move through the kill zone. Torres looked at Marcus, knowing the next move required a sprint, while Marcus looked at his watch, timing the ground compression that preceded the final strike and knowing the dust would hang motionless over the centrifuge ruins before the final shockwave cleared the debris field. And somewhere above the atmosphere, the hammer was already falling again, aiming for the administrative block, which housed the command center for the entire complex and the key to unlocking the defense networks that controlled the security cameras and automated turrets surrounding the site. The command bunker took the third rod at 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 41 seconds, and the spear hit harder than the first two impacts because the building had less mass to absorb the force, and the administrative block, 3 stories of reinforced concrete above the bunker, simply forgot it was standing and dropped straight down like a house of cards, collapsing in the wind. The shock wave radiated outward at ground level in a visible ring of dust, loose gravel, and dry soil, lifting in a circular wave that crossed the inner perimeter road in half a second, while the 3 armored vehicles sealing the east road went sideways, simultaneously thrown 2 meters, maybe 3 by a pressure wave, arriving without warning and departing just as fast, leaving the crew shaken but alive. 7 seconds of chaos followed immediately, while Marcus was already moving north, calling the rest of the team to converge on the drainage culvert in a dead sprint, while the garrison formation pressed flat by the shock wave and vehicles rocking with radios overwhelmed provided a window where every defender was reorienting themselves. The operators used 6 of those seconds to enter the culvert through the far side and into open scrubland covering 300 meters of broken terrain between them and the ridgeline where the extraction vehicle waited for them. The extraction bird came in low rotors, flat and fast running without lights skimming the ridge, 3 kilometers north, so tight to the rock face, the dust trails followed behind the landing skids, touching the ground momentarily before bouncing off the uneven surface. The gray silhouette dropped into the only flat ground in the area, a dry riverbed 40 meters wide, marked by a single infrared strobe that Torres had activated 90 seconds ago to guide the pilot home safely. The 6 hit the riverbed at a run, while the rotors never fully stopped, and all 6 were aboard in 11 seconds, with the bird lifting before the last boot cleared the deck, banking hard north, losing altitude on the far side of the ridge, before any radar picket in the area could resolve the return vector at 6 a.m. Thrawn time. Iranian state television interrupted its morning broadcast with an anchor reading a prepared statement in measured flat tones, claiming seismic activity was recorded overnight in industrial zones south of Isfahan, while authorities assessed infrastructure integrity and assured the public there was no cause for alarm. The broadcast ran for 40 seconds with no follow-up questions and no footage shown, indicating a deliberate effort to suppress the scale of the event while preventing panic among the civilian population waiting for news of the disruption. By 8:34, separate satellite passes had imaged the facility, allowing analysis teams in 3 different countries to work the imagery simultaneously, comparing it against baseline photos taken 72 hours prior, revealing 3 distinct collapse signatures matching the predicted targets. The centrifuge level was gone, confirmed by the absence of structural columns in the grid map, and the processing annex was gone, confirmed by the thermal bloom, cooling rapidly in the early morning sun, and the administrative block and command bunker were compressed to half their original height, confirming the vertical impact depth. One analyst flagged something unusual appearing in the 4th structure, partially visible in the baseline imagery, as an unmarked concrete pad in the facility's southeast corner appeared undisturbed, with no damage, no collapse, and no signs of fire damage in the infrared spectrum, where the satellite's ground-penetrating overlay suggested a vertical shaft beneath that pad extending downward approximately 800 meters, while the facility's treaty declarations listed nothing below 40 meters depth, meaning the data contradicted official records. The analyst ran the number twice, checking the calculations again to see if the error was in the software or the sensors, but the result did not change, indicating a hidden facility below the known infrastructure. The extraction bird crossed into friendly airspace at 9:14 while Marcus sat against the fuselage, eyes closed, not sleeping but processing the memory of the shaking ground and the feeling of impact reverberating through the hull. Torres stared out the porthole at the brown landscape scrolling below, knowing the mission was successful, but wondering what else remained buried in the dirt where no one was looking. Neither man spoke because the silence was louder than the noise of the engines, and the relief of survival was mixed with the knowledge that the war was not over, just the battle at this location. The orbital platform, completing its orbital arc, processed the mission's post-strike confirmation data declaring Strike 1, confirmed Strike 2 confirmed, and Strike 3 confirmed, advancing the targeting queue automatically to the next entry with a coordinate set uploaded before departure flagged with a conditional trigger. Execute only on confirmed. Secondary target verification meant the system was waiting for new intel before firing again, because the protocol required human oversight for the final round, even though the machine had done everything perfectly. The platform holds its position somewhere beneath Isfahan's dust and ruin, ready to deploy the final rod if the secondary target is verified as operational centrifuges that were never logged by the world's inspectors turning beneath the concrete pad that showed no damage on the satellite imagery. The world's inspectors never logged the hidden shaft still turning while the planet above keeps spinning silently, waiting for the signal to release the hammer one last time and finish the job that started with a tremor in the dark. The facility was destroyed, but the enemy remained unseen and the weapon remained charged, and the tension returned to the operational moment before it started, with the ground shaking again somewhere underneath the rubble that covered the truth.